great pleasure to welcome you here to the launch of Bruce Guthrie's Man Bites Murdoch. As you might imagine, persuading an editor-in-chief to write a book is quite a challenge. There's almost nothing a book publisher can teach a newspaper editor about writing, about the shape, about structure, about tone, even about the pictures. Certainly when it comes to titles, an editor of Bruce's class needs no help whatsoever from his publisher. My own sense of Bruce was fairly slight. I knew about him and his various roles in the print media, and we had crossed paths briefly at the Age. I was leaving as he arrived as editor. But when I heard about his dismissal from the Herald Sun, I thought it was too good a story to let some other publisher seize. So what could MUP offer Bruce, an experienced editor, but actually a novice in the game of book writing? He wouldn't even take an advance to write the book. We begged him, we pleaded, and he kept saying no, and he was actually only persuaded to accept one once he delivered the entire manuscript. All we could do, and did do, was offer encouragement, our conviction that his story was worth writing. But Bruce remained sceptical throughout, but we were convinced that his journey through 4 decades of the print media world was at once a local and personal story, but also a much larger account of journalism, its past, its present, and its likely future. So we just kept talking. We talked at the European, we talked at Florentino's, we talked here, we talked in almost every cafe in Melbourne. And we kept, yes, anyway, we won't go into the details. We can talk about the details later. We kept talking. We didn't send a lot of text messages to each other for certain legal reasons, but we kept talking. I should say that I have met a few editors-in-chief, so I think I'm beginning to understand the species. And one thing they do all seem to share is a fairly healthy degree of certainty. Some might call it dogmatism, but I'll just say certainty. Maybe it's because the business is predicated on the ability to make judgments, rapid-fire judgments about what's newsworthy and what's not. And Bruce's own editorships have been marked by this same decisiveness. But when it came to writing this book, he was willing to take advice and even direction. Okay, not always, but he did at least hear us out with a little politeness, put a benign smile on his face. He listened. And we think that the partnership has delivered a ripping good read, fast, funny, and even disturbing. I think that's the legal team arrived. Is it? Oh, the bankers. Oh, even better, the bankers have arrived. Yes, okay, we won't even go there. Man Bites Murdoch will be read by the paranoid as a critique of News Limited. But I think it's about much more than life inside Murdochsville. This is a book about the newsroom. It takes us ordinary citizens inside the world of newspapers. Think of what Kitchen Confidential brought to the culture and practice of modern journalism. That's what we think that Bruce has done today. Man Bites Murdoch is a brave book, but it's been fascinating to watch the media's response so far. With so few outlets for journalism and the declining fortunes of print media, it's been interesting to see who has the courage to discuss the book and who its audience might be. Quite properly, the ABC, which thankfully still adheres to the Charter of Editorial Independence, has shown interest. Fairfax has also supported the book superbly, and our thanks go in particular to Paul Ramage and Mark Baker. Is Fairfax prompted perhaps by a skerrick of self-interest, a healthy level of competitiveness, and why not, a satisfied publisher might ask? But that's the story of Man Bites Murdoch. It's a story of self-interest, it's a story of competitiveness, it's a story about print media and its past and where its future might lie. So I was delighted when Ray Martin agreed to launch this book. I've always thought of Ray as a journalist with real independence and authenticity. His own career has been long and not without its own ups and downs. So we knew that he would get the book, he would understand what Bruce was on about. And that said, his life would certainly have been easier if he'd declined our invitation. But keeping his head below the parapets has never been Ray Martin's style. Launching this book is an act of friendship by Ray towards MUP, but it's also, and much more importantly, an act of collegiality and camaraderie from one elder statesman to another slightly younger veteran of the same game. Ray understands Guthrie's world, the tensions, the personal sacrifices, the exhilaration, the personality clashes, the thrill of winning a week's ratings or circulation figures. Of course, Ray has recently published his own hugely successful memoirs, and it has been a huge success. It's sold over 150,000 copies, and I think you could say that there are about 5 non-fiction titles in the last 5 years that have sold that number, so it's an extraordinary result. But publicly supporting this book might not mean lunch very soon with Ray, with anyone from News Limited. So I thank Ray for putting principles before lunch. Please welcome Ray Martin to the microphone.
I want it to be known that I'm not really here today, okay? I don't want my card marked back in Holt Street in Sydney, which if Bruce knows what he's talking about happens a lot, it seems. And I want it on the record as well that I think this book is an outrageous pack of lies. And that Bruce Guthrie is, as Rupert so eloquently put it in his book, a Fairfax wanker. Or at least he used to be, and he would be if he could be. Looking at the guest list today, which Louise supplied for me, it is a colourful, small C Catholic mix of journos and pollies and fellow travellers. Every one of you, I have to inform you, has been made your cards marked in being here today. Bruce, I had a note from Jeff this morning. He said to start without him. Jeff Kennedy I'm talking about, but he wouldn't miss it for Quincy. He said he'll be here a bit later. Have you read the book? I know why. I mentioned Catholic with a small c in talking about those who turned up this morning, but talking about the real Catholics, the big C. A few months after I left Channel 9 2 years ago, I got a call from Cardinal George Pell, and he asked me if I'd like to be the host of the worldwide television coverage of the Pope's visit to Sydney for World Youth Day. He said they expected an audience of about 1 billion people. I said yes, but I warned His Eminence that I was a lapsed Catholic who married a Presbyterian in a Presbyterian church. And he wasn't fazed. He said that the church had survived worse problems than mine, and what's more, it showed just how ecumenical the true church is. Now, I feel a bit ecumenical being here today, I've got to tell you. I mean, a couple of years ago I was honoured to give the Andrew Ollie lecture on the ABC, and the gist of that speech that I gave that night was that I felt the Australian media badly needed its moguls back. Kerry had gone, not mine, it's probably Holt Street. The Fairfaxes had gone broke and Rupert had gone offshore. In a sense, I don't want to be didactic about this, but Rupert had taken his eyes off the ball. Bruce may disagree with me about that, but that was the impression I had. What I was trying to say was that I'd sooner put up with the ruthless media moguls who at least understood and understand and love the news business, rather than the new generation of carpetbaggers, the venture capitalists who'd taken over television and who were just going into rape and pillage and didn't really care about the culture of the news business in Australia as we know it, or about iconic television networks like Channel 9. So in essence, my Andrew Ollie lecture was in defence of Messrs Packer and Fairfax, and especially of Rupert Murdoch. To compound the felony, as I say, ecumenical, I agreed to be part of the expensive multimedia campaign to relaunch the Australian newspaper last year. I did that gratis, I did it free of charge, because I love newspapers, and I want to see the newspaper survive in this country. I mostly enjoy the Australian when I read it, which is every day. Certainly it's often enlightened coverage of Indigenous affairs, which I'm deeply concerned and involved in, through intelligent and lovely writers like Nicholas Rothwell. Now here I am today, after that background, launching Bruce Guthrie's book about how he took on the great man Mr Murdoch and his mild-mannered mob, and he won. I told you I was ecumenical. It's very hard to say no to Louise Adler. She just keeps coming at you. She just keeps coming, Bruce, doesn't she? I think I'm on her standby B team of book launches. When the first bunch knock her back, she gets me to launch Lee Sales' outstanding book on David Hicks, whose book comes out this Saturday. I'm not launching it, but I've read it, and it's quite outstanding. And Malcolm Fraser's surprisingly excellent memoirs, written by Margaret Summers. I think it was here. Margaret's here today as well. Fantastic memoirs. And now, of course, this book, so I'm very honoured to be here. I must confess that I'm a long-time fan of Bruce Guthrie, of his innovations, of his mastery of newspapers in Australia, his love of news and words, and of course storytelling, and his ethics. Bruce reveals in his book, for the first time, that in the early 1990s, he decided to shift into television current affairs and take me on. It's a very amusing Ray Who story, in which Mr Guthrie, egged on by Channel 7, exec sets out to change the whole landscape of Australian television. The only trouble is Channel 7 forgot to renew back. So we're still waiting for Bruce to change the landscape. I don't know what it is about Melbourne newspapers and Melbourne newspaper editors that seems to dominate the Australian media landscape. This is an amazing media town. Earlier this year came Ben Hill's reverential and beautifully written book on Graham Perkin, Breaking News he called it. There's soon to be a book published on Creighton Burns, another legendary Age editor. and of course today's launch of Bruce's War Stories. It seems there are no bestsellers or no books written about Sydney newspaper editors. Now I have to say that I almost read Bruce's book in one long sitting on Sunday. I found it absolutely compelling, even though I knew the ending of the book. I've got to say, in my 45 years in journalism, I spent a few years covering politics for the ABC in Canberra, with the internecine brawls and bastardry that involved. I grew up amidst what Menzies regarded as the communist and anarchist cells of the ABC in the turbulent 1960s when I was first a cadet. Then I spent a decade in Washington doing Watergate in the fraudulent Richard Nixon era. I covered the pinstripe suit intrigue in the fluorescent United Nations corridors. Then for 30 years I watched in awe at the shenanigans and the power plays of commercial television when Kerry Packer swung from the nation's television towers a bit like King Kong, and with men like Sam Chisholm and Bruce Gingell and David Leckie beating their chests and anybody else who got in the way. I've also covered a few wars over the years, witnessed a few natural disasters from volcanoes to tsunamis. I was at ringside for the first Muhammad Ali Joe Frazier fight at Madison Square Garden, when over 15 rounds they pounded each other into pop and also into a hospital ward. So I thought that I'd been blooded. And then I read Man Bites Murdoch, a litany, a catalogue, a cocktail, a toxic mix of backstabbing and undermining and double-dealing and treachery and appalling duplicitous behaviour in the mostly Melbourne newspaper world, although obviously involved the upper reaches of Sydney. Rasputin meets Machiavelli. You can forget underbelly. I mean, fairly, it's nowhere near as bloody as Bruce's newspaper saga. Maybe I exaggerate, but not that much. Bruce understates it. He refers to a story of arrogance, aggression and hubris. Well, it is that, and it's a damn sight lot more. If I was a callow, innocent youth thinking of maybe an idealistic career in journalism in this town, I'd probably think again. I'd maybe join the SAS or go into the pub security game, something a bit safer. But if you love big power plays and intrigue, as I said, and a cast of colourful characters, whom we all know so well, these characters, then you won't be able to put this book down. Reading his story, there are times when I thought that even Bruce Guthrie didn't want to be there. When he seemed, he smiles, when he seemed like the odd man out. And even when his instincts and his tongue said no, he found himself sucked into what he calls the village of the damned. The village of the damned. I remember interviewing Johnny Raper, probably the greatest rugby league player of all time, long after he retired. And he said that he'd broken so many bones and battered his body so badly that every joint ached. He had chronic arthritis. The pained him just to get out of bed in the morning. And I asked him if he had his time over again, would he put himself through the torture again? I'd do it in a flash, he said. No question, with a big grin. I'm sure that Bruce Guthrie would give me the same answer. Would you do it again? You bet I would, I'm sure. Man Bites Murdoch is a fantastic window into the alcohol and adrenaline-fuelled newspaper world of this town and of this state and of this country. In fact, way beyond our shores. I found Bruce's experience, I was talking to him last night on the phone, his experience of working for Time Inc. in New York was just absolutely fascinating. To experience the way the Yanks do it. In a delightful turn of phrase, Bruce says that of the People magazine where he was working for a while, that their writing style, he says that they refused to allow a noun to stand naked. It's a lovely way to do it. They refused to allow a noun to stand naked. That was their style.